a mistake that I see a lot of people make is they think that, the data that they see on app platform reporting needs to match whatever they see on their source of truth. They think like, okay, my meta number of conversions is much higher than what I see in Google Analytics. So we need to make these changes to how we attribute it on meta. So these numbers are matching what we see in J4. And what I say is like the ad platform conversions is not for you. You should not take this data as this is how my campaign is performing. The ad platform conversions and ad platform data is about helping the ad platforms target and convert better. You need to use something else to measure how these campaigns are performing.
Welcome to Experimental, the podcast that cuts through the noise to bring you actionable insights in B2C growth, marketing, and data science. I'm your host, Sundar, former head of brand data science at Uber and the mind behind the Experimental newsletter. Join me as I talk with industry leaders who have driven growth at companies like Uber, Spotify, and Netflix. We'll uncover the experiments, failures, and breakthroughs that lead to real results. Now, let's get experimental. Today, my guest is Barbara Galiza. She's a consultant and advisor focusing on all things marketing measurement. Right now, she's the founder of Fix My Tracking, which helps companies focus on conversions through ad platforms. With that, I just want to say, hey, Barbara, and welcome to Experimental.
Thank you so much for having me, Sundar. Excited to chat to you today.
Yes. Well, thank you for being here. I think we're going to spend an hour on a notion that you said, are we running campaigns like it's still 2015? I think there's still so much to unpack there, from tracking to targeting to just creatives. So this is going to be super exciting. We're going to get to go super deep on one topic. So I want to first start off with, what does that even mean? Like, what does it mean to have run ads in 2015 versus 2025? We'll start at a high level and then we'll definitely go deeper.
For sure. I think, when paid campaigns was, really picking up in 2015 was like a big year for like Meta and app campaigns. It was the beginning of like mobile news feed ads and the likes. And, really winning at paid campaigns at that time was about manual control. It was about creating lookalike audiences, excluding certain audiences, creating interest-based audiences, and also controlling everything you spend along the way. So, setting targets for CPC, setting targets for CPM, and really defining on each step of the way what should run to whom. So, what I see it a lot with advertisers happening then, I was running a lot of campaigns, is let's say, you have a specific ad group that is targeting people with a specific interest, and then you would make the creatives that you're serving there really match that audience. So when you're thinking about how campaigns used to run, like 10 to 12 years ago, you're talking about how do I create a taxonomy that allows me to control who is receiving the ads, which ad they're receiving, and how much are we paying for an interaction there.
And you felt that was across every channel?
I was doing a lot of meta ads and also for some clients, search ads. And in both of those cases, I saw this control being what would perform the best. When I was running app campaigns in 2015, I would be changing the bids on a daily basis. I would be, watching the campaign, change a bid, watch how it reacts, and then readjust that bid. And it was something that I had tested then, okay, like, do we have a more automatic approach versus a more like manual bid control? And time over time, what I would see back then was, like having this control, really defining on a granular level would lead to more efficiency of the campaigns.
And in 2015 then, so when you were working on these campaigns, did you have like a super deep understanding of your audience? Or how did you go about even just the segmenting in that approach?
Well, I think some of the segmentation that approach would be depending on what are the capabilities of targeting of the ad platform. So it would depend on what platform you're talking about. But if we use Meta as an example here, you had first party audiences. So you had either, like perhaps like a list that you have of leads. So that would be like a list of people you would target from the emails you've gotten directly. And then if you had multiple lists, you would split these ad groups per multiple lists. You had lookalikes, which were quite popular and still popular-ish, but you can definitely see how they've been dying out. So you would have lookalikes based on, let's say, installs, lookalikes for all registrations, lookalikes for people who have purchased, lookalikes for people that have purchased the most. You would create these lookalikes of different levels from your first party data. And then alongside that, you also had the third party targeting options. So for something like Meta, you would have, for example, pages liked. That used to be quite common. So, what you could do is, depending on the page size, maybe you have an ad group that's people that liked one page in specific, or you have, like a group, a theme of pages. So you're kind of seeing what are the capabilities that each ad platform has in targeting. And then how can I split the campaign based on these different targeting options?
What's crazy to me is that sounds like what should still be happening in 2025 or even might be or could be. And so I think it's crazy to me that I think we're about to get deep into, yeah, I'm guessing that's not how we should be doing it. So let's start framing this in it's 2025. Where do we even start? Like why is that everything you said about 2015 feels
Mhm.
feel almost like, 3 decades ago? Like what's changed?
Yeah. I think the main thing that has changed has been the ad platform's capabilities of identifying who's more likely to convert has gotten a lot better. Has gotten better than the contextual targeting that us advertisers manually put in for a campaign. So, with AI, but this has been the case with machine learning over the last few years. Ad platforms have gotten better to understand, okay, maybe if you've liked this page you're more likely to convert, but then you're also leaving money on the table because we know that these other people that you're not currently targeting would have also an interest in your product. So we've kind of like moved away from really telling the ad platforms who they should reach. And instead, we're moving towards a place where we're telling ad platforms who are the customers that we want. And that means, not necessarily creating an interest based targeting, but passing to ad platforms information on the customers that we have. So that's where conversion tracking really comes in on making sure that you're sending these signals to the ad platform, and then the ad platform is therefore able to take these signals and define the targeting that will work best for your campaign.
Okay, and we'll dig into that in a bit. What I'm curious though is every ad expert that I talk to recommends what you're saying. And yet, why is it so prevalent that there's still a lot of people feeling like they have to like manually target? Like, where do you think this disconnect is?
Yeah, that is a really great question. And I have a client, I've had a client recently where I've been really trying to do the education part on this. They had everything set up on a very manual way, um, uh, turning off campaigns if a few days they weren't performing, really trying to perhaps keep too much of a close eye on the campaigns, as in they thought that was being positive, but it was actually like hurting the performance. I think that perhaps we haven't really reached the point where we trust advertisers, not advertisers, where we trust ad platforms that they're able to target. But I also think there is a technical problem deep down, which is in relation to conversion tracking. So, a lot of the cases what you see is advertisers, maybe the events that they're using to optimize the campaigns based on doesn't fire enough. Maybe the event that they're using is too low in the funnel. And because of that, they're not sending the volume that an ad platform requires to really understand what makes that customer valuable. It can also be there is a problem in the attribution. So perhaps they are sending this event happens often, but the event is not able to be attributed to the campaign. Maybe the event occurs outside of the look back window. Maybe, the event has just too many cross device journeys, and then the ad platform is not able to attribute. And then also, a situation also technical that I see quite often is an advertiser is passing an event, but they're not passing a value of how much that event is worth. So with something like a subscription product, users are going to have very different value. So if you're only setting up campaigns that are based on user has subscribed, true, you're putting in the same bid for all users, and you end up, getting the cheapest users because, you're using like a CAC based event targeting. And then what happens is, in that case, like this consolidated approach can indeed underperform the manual approach. And it's not necessarily because, the manual approach performs best. It's more that technically there is gaps on how the data signals that are passed into the ad platform is set up or is being sent, is being attributed, and the likes.
Wow. I think right there alone, if people just listen to that like 2-minute answer could solve so many of their problems. But let's go deeper into all of them, right? Because you've now brought up conversion tracking, you brought up
Yeah.
attribution, you bring like a data value. Okay, let's start with the conversion event itself.
Mm-hmm.
You're Barbara, you go in, you're an expert on this. Walk me through how you are working with the founder and how you're understanding, hey, what's the right conversion value I should pass back?
Yes. No, that's a really great question. And also, what conversion you are going to use can also depend on what ad platform it is, right? Google by nature, paid search by nature is a lot more contextual than paid social, right? So Meta is really relying on signals alone because the ads are not showing in a place that it's contextually relevant to the product that's being advertised, right? The product is being advertised in the news feed related to, content that has most likely nothing to do with your product. So Meta needs a lot more conversions to optimize than Google. So what Meta usually recommends is that each ad group has 50 conversions per week, 50 attributed conversions per week. So, one of the first things to think about when you're picking this event for optimization is this event going to occur often enough with the budget that we have to be able to use as the conversion optimization event? So that is the main thing that I'm trying to figure out usually I'm working with the marketing team. So helping them figure out this type of event. And obviously, what we want to have is an event that is as close to revenue as possible. So you're always trying to get to an event that there is a direct revenue to your product. So you want to have something like ideally a subscription event or a purchase event, especially if you're like e-commerce. And then also something else, as well as the count of the event, something that you need to pay attention to is the look back window too. Because, with like some like B2B, what you have is it takes a very long time for the user to subscribe. It takes a lot more than 7 days from click to event. So in that case, you also need to pick an event that ideally, I always try to recommend an event that happens as close to the click as possible. So as you can see here, you're kind of balancing two, two very different things because you want an event that both fire fast and also represents revenue. So it's
Yeah. So if I were to summarize, roughly at least 50 events per week, as close to revenue as possible within as tight of a look back window as possible.
yes,
That is a very high level, 3 level thing that you have to, like you said, you have to balance across.
yeah,
That's, for again, all of my experience has been in consumer tech. And so I imagine for consumer tech, when it has a shorter, all of these things are feasible and doable. There's no excuse for conversion tracking, right? Like, okay. So that's the first piece of the
yes.
puzzle, quote,
And
solved.
this
Yeah.
is indeed like a lot easier for B2C because like the time to purchase is a lot shorter, and also the volume is a lot bigger. So by definition, B2C makes it easier to really harvest the best out of algorithms, but it doesn't mean that that's also not the case for P2P, as I imagine you're going to ask me next.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you that, but on B2C itself and consumer tech,
Yeah.
I just want to make sure, like, there's never a reason not to pass back, like revenue or purchase, if that is the best metric, right? Like, is there ever a reason not to? Is there another? Is there absolutely a world where you'd be like, no, actually, a metric before earlier in the funnel makes sense, or no? Like you said, just
Well, like assuming that, in most cases, like we've said, like indeed, like you can have a metric that's very close because like we've talked about, B2C has both volume and it has like a short time to purchase. There are situations where the revenue value you want to pass is predicted.
mm,
So for example, like a subscription app, perhaps, first month everyone is paying the same, and along the time that the user stays in the product, that's what really impacts the LTV. Or sometimes it can also be things like upselling or number of seats. They're all like events the user can partake that will increase the LTV. And in that case it can be better, or in that case I would say it is better to have a predicted value that passes for example, when the purchase occurs. And there are different ways of calculating this. Usually what 100% B2C products do is they're going to look at product usage. So they will look at, let's say, the first 24 hours of the user within the product, and then based on what they gather there, they will estimate how likely are they to retain and all of these other activities.
yeah. And is there an advantage to passing this back real time to the platform, or do you, is it okay if you like batching, like, or if you pass a couple of days later? Like, is there anything in terms of like the technical pipelines that you're like, hey, these are absolutely best practices?
Yeah, so the earliest you pass this event, the more likely it will be attributed to the campaign.
Mm,
Just because, then Facebook is able, I'm talking about social here, because like I said, like it's the one that relies the most on data signals. So like, Meta, TikTok, channels like that. So there is an advantage of passing this event as soon as possible to increase the attribution to, the campaign, the ad group that you're using this event to optimize towards. Again, this is also a balance because you need to have enough data to calculate, to predict the value. So, usually what I see is advertisers doing this calculation for the first 12 hours, and then they pass this event. And
got
then they
it.
can also pass this event, with the timestamp of when the event has occurred. And then that also helps with attribution.
Amazing. Amazing and so intuitive, but I think you've really beautifully articulated that. And so now I want to move on to the next thing that we talked about, which is attribution.
Hmm.
You brought it up before. Like, tell me about especially 2015 versus 2025, and now sort of what are best practices today.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when you're talking about in specific ad platform attribution. So I'm not talking about like a one source of truth, Snowplow, J4. I'm talking about how well is Meta able to take the events that you've sent to Meta and identify that, those events have occurred by someone that has either viewed or clicked on an ad. And, back in 2015, there was a lot more data that would flow between ad platforms, apps, cross device, and things like that, right? If you're talking about like pre ATT days, you had IDFA, which you could use to stitch these journeys together. And that is very relevant to say for social, because, when you're looking at, social campaigns, what you're actually looking is mobile traffic, right? So I think I don't know what the number is, but I would say some Meta is probably at the stage something like 90% mobile. So that means, there will most likely always be a cross device journey. Or I call it cross device, but what it is in practice most times is a cross-browser journey. Because when someone clicks on an ad on that they've seen on their Facebook app, on the Instagram app, or the TikTok app, that ad will load in the in-app browser. And if, when they decide to purchase, let's say that they're doing that in an app that they've installed, or even if they go on to do that on Safari or Chrome that they have installed on their own device, this will be seen by the platform as two separate users in most cases because they're not logged in. So in most cases, this attribution will break if you're only using, click-based tracking. And there are a lot of ways now in 2025 that didn't exist before in 2015 because we needed them last in 2015 that help bridge this gap. And the main thing that helps bridge this gap right now is passing PII on the converters to the app platform. So, passing things like first name, last name, email, postcode, phone number. If your mobile app that you have, Facebook SSO, you can also pass, a Facebook user ID. Then you pass this information alongside your conversion. You can do that client side with enhanced conversions. But most advertisers, they're setting this up from a server to server capacity because they're doing some type of lead scoring that they need to wait 12 hours for that. So then they can't do that on the client, but they're passing this information on the user. So the ad platform is better able to understand or isolate who they are. And then they can therefore attribute the conversions to the right touch points.
And on that, I feel like a lot of founders immediately jump to thinking like you can't pass any of that back, whether because it's GDPR or something else. Like maybe set the record and the truth here. Like what can you and can you not do, or what should you not do?
Yeah, so I'm not in a position to give anyone legal advice. Even like in the US, like each state has different legislation. It also depends if you're B2B and B2C. A lot of people argue, B2B there's a legitimate interest, so that they can therefore, pass emails. For B2C, some people use for mobile apps, use the ATT prompt to define whether or not there is consent. So I would say this is best to be discussed with your legal team, depending on what is your business and where are you running advertising, and even, what kind of industry you have. There's different laws for health care, different laws for finance. So it's not a one size fits all approach.
Fair enough. And clearly someone who over the last 8-9 years has run into a lot of these things and has learned the right things to say. But I think that's a fair call out. It really is so different across every legislation and every product. So that is an important call out. But I think what you're articulating though is if you've done the right legal work and you have the information and it's allowed to be passed back as much as you can, as long as it's, within the realms of the law.
For sure. Although, a lot of these laws are quite gray. So again, I let the legal team decide. But yeah, I would say that what I see usually, is a lot of B2B businesses argue there's legitimate interest, and B2C is usually more, yeah, they're under more scrutiny also. So there is a need to show you have consent, but again, that really depends on the market too, because indeed, like I said, California has much stricter laws than other states, so it's all very, outside of my expertise.
Absolutely. So to summarize all of this, do you have any golden rules that you go by and you're like, hey, here's if you can't hire me and you don't know what to do, here's how to think about it?
Yes, I think we've done a great job here summarizing, I think, the main points. I think, pick a conversion event that occurs often enough. Pick a conversion event that will be able to attribute because of, the look back window, and things like that. And also make sure that whatever you're able to pass to improve attribution, you are passing. A mistake that I see a lot of people make is they think that, the data that they see on app platform reporting needs to match whatever they see on their source of truth. I've been brought up, and I can see you smiling because I can see that you've seen this before. They think like, okay, my meta number of conversions is much higher than what I see in Google Analytics. So we need to make these changes to how we attribute it on meta. So these numbers are matching what we see in J4. And what I say is like the ad platform conversions is not for you. You should not take this data as this is how my campaign is performing. The ad platform conversions and ad platform data is about helping the ad platforms target and convert better. You need to use something else to measure how these campaigns are performing.
Just the content creator in me is firing on all cylinders as that is the headline, right? Stop using these platforms for you. It's for the platform. I think that is such a valuable nugget. And like no one has really summarized or articulated that well as you have in all the people I've talked to and all the things I'm seeing on LinkedIn. I want to double down on that, but I want to get back to that because I have one more question. Like, what about like in terms of number of events? Is this like, hey, like, should you send back 20 events? Should you send back like 5? Like, is there a general framework that you have to be like, hey, less is more, anything like that?
Yeah, I would always say like less is more. So for example, for Fix My Tracking, which is the productized service that I'm running to, help advertisers fix conversion tracking, I've put a limit of 3 conversion events per ad platform. So you have an awareness event that you use for campaigns, which is usually better to use to optimize campaigns than using something like clicks or CPM. So that can be something like 3 seconds on page is something that I set up often. Like a client side event that fires when the user has spent, a certain of time, a certain amount of time on a page. And then you fire an event, and then you're not just optimizing towards landing page views, not just towards clicks. Then you have something that's slightly bit more qualified, but you can still use it for an awareness campaign. Then I recommend setting up the event for the first time you grab or you collect the PII. So for a B2C business, that could be a registration, and for a B2B, that can be a lead generation event. So it can be like booked a call, it can be download a white paper, registered for an event. It can be any of these events. So, at that moment on, you're collecting the email. So you are for the first time really being able to calculate the value of who that person is and what that conversion is. And then I would say the third event is the event that you use for your conversion campaigns. And it will depend on how far in the funnel are you able to set this. Like I said, for like B2B companies, a lot of the times the revenue event occurs after the look back window. So maybe for a B2B, this conversion event will be registration. But for B2C, that can be purchase, that can be subscription.
Got it. So maximum of 3, 1 for potentially each roughly sort of stage of the funnel. Again, enough signal and enough, all the rules that we talked about. One thing I did want to go back to is the idea of ad groups. And this is something that I myself am so confused with, like with kind of what you're saying, which is like, hey, give a lot of the control over to the platforms. And like, in what scenario do you have a separate ad group versus, hey, just group it under the same ad group? Like, well, how do you differentiate that?
Yeah, so I would say for social, I think about ad groups in terms of creatives and landing pages. So let's say that you want to serve a specific type of creative to a certain group, then you're going to create a separate ad group. On a campaign level, I'm always thinking about the level which the budget is allocated. So let's say at campaign level, what most advertisers have is they have a set budget per market. Sometimes they have a separate budget per market and product line, depending on how they're structured. So at campaign level, because it's at campaign level that you can really define, like, okay, like I'm spending, 5,000 a day, that you define on a campaign level. And then on the ad group is the part where you start to group the creatives, assign the landing pages to the creatives. That's the part more related to what's being served and who it's being served towards.
Yeah, and the creatives, and those are more like in your mind, like creative concepts or goals for the creative, whether one's awareness versus conversion, like that kind of differentiation, or how do you differentiate the creatives?
No, because the goal is also going to be set on the campaign level.
Mm,
So, what you're going to have is in a campaign, okay, this is a awareness campaign for this market and this product line. And maybe you only have one ad group. That's quite common too. So you have one ad group and you have all the creatives. But maybe you want to have a certain division of creatives, maybe for reporting, you want to make sure that creatives from a certain team are being served. And then you put that in the ad group level.
okay. Now let's go back to what you briefly touched on, which is the elephant in the room, incrementality,
Yes.
and exactly what you're saying, which is, measurement is not the same thing as optimization. Like, give me Barbara's view of incrementality versus measurement.
I guess incrementality is part of measurement, right?
Hmm.
I would say more like the big distinction that I try to make with clients when I'm talking about marketing data is there's marketing data for optimization and there's marketing data for reporting. So I try to make that distinction really clear. When we're talking about ad platform tracking, what we're talking about is data for optimization. When we're talking about MEM, incrementality tests, rule-based MTA, we're talking about marketing data for reporting. And they have different goals.
In my mind, like, just again, I go back to the comment you made about in platform is not for you. And I am like, I'm going to hold on to that for a while.
Yeah.
So I want to pivot a little bit because I love to learn from case studies and stories, I think, like most other people. Whatever you can share, I'd love to go through an example of how you came in, what you observed, what you fixed, and sort of the results. Like, just go take us through that whole journey if you can.
Yeah, for sure. So I've had a recent client now, which I really want to write a case study too. So I really need to make the time to do this. But I've been working there as a B2B business, and I've been working there. I do like fractional work also. So one of the things that I do like fractional marketing analyst lead or fractional marketing analyst team is something that I'm starting to work on where, I help bring in like analysts or data engineers to tackle problems. So with this client, I've been doing this fractional work. And then one of the things that I've done is, yeah, I audit their campaigns, their structure. And I always like to spend a lot of time on taxonomy. I think it's a lot of the times people don't spend enough time thinking about it. They just go like, ah, it's a naming convention. I need to include this and this in this field, let it run. But like we've talked about, when we're talking about what goes at campaign level, what was at ad group level, taxonomy is really what in the end defines your budget allocation.
And you're
So
talking about, sorry, real quick, you're talking about taxonomy of the campaign names themselves, or can you double click on what you mean by
so I'm
taxonomy?
talking about what, like, if we're talking about let me take a step back to think of what's a good way to explain. So when we were talking about earlier about the meta campaign, and we were talking about this example, that most advertisers put markets on a campaign level because that's, the level that they define budget on. But on paper, you could also have a campaign that's like world, and then you have each ad group targeting a different market. And in these two examples, how the budget is going to be allocated is going to be very different. So on the example that you have one campaign per market, you are manually deciding how much budget do I want to spend on in Brazil versus Germany versus the United States. On the other group, where you have a global campaign and you have market per ad group, what you have there is the platform is going to define how much budget each market has. So that means that you can have the case where a market that brings cheap the lowest cost conversions and the biggest volumes of conversions can then be responsible for 90% of the spend. So that is just a very simple example of how the taxonomy you choose and on which level how many campaigns do you create will impact how the budget is distributed between strategies. That's just an example of how, like, budget allocation can change, because in one example, you can have, each market with 20% of the budget. And in the other example, you can have one market with 90% of the budget, and then other markets with drops of budget. So what this client had is this was a paid search, was auditing, and they had a different campaign for each keyword team. So let's say like you're Uber, and I use this example because you are, former Uber, and I see Uber come up a lot. So that could be something like you have like an ad group for getting a taxi from the airport, and then you have another ad group for going to work, and then you have another ad group for I don't know, I need more Uber examples. But like a competitor Lyft, and you have another ad group for competitor taxi, right? Sorry, another campaign, not another ad group. They had different campaigns for this. So what the marketers would do, they would decide on how much budget each of these teams would be, worth to them. And then, what that would mean is that the budget wouldn't be distributing to the ad groups that perform the best, because the structure of the campaign, of how they've set it up, didn't give them that flexibility. So what we did, we shifted to like a much more streamlined approach, where it was very simple. It was markets on a campaign level, and then also product line, because they have different products, and then each ad group being like a different keyword team. And the difference that I made to the campaigns were insane, because we saw that there were like because they had like something like 30 ad groups per market. So if you were running something like, they had like 10 markets, they had something like 300 campaigns with individual budgets set it up for each one of them. And they were not able, to do enough analysis to allocate this budget in the most efficient way as, demand changes, as new keywords, start to grow. So the taxonomy was creating a big inefficiency of how the campaigns were spending. And then, I don't have the numbers, but we were honestly like, they were spending something like, yeah, they shared with me the other day, they were spending something like 100,000 per month or something. And I started, we launched this new taxonomy like, 4 months ago. And now we're spending 100,000 a day. Like that's how much we were able to increase the scale while remaining the efficiency with a different taxonomy.
Wow.
The impact is like, can be absolutely, huge for these things.
Yeah, 30x the volume at the same efficiency is really unheard of. Amazing. So taxonomy makes total sense. Structuring, reducing overlap, reducing duplication makes a ton of sense. What was the next thing that you were able to observe?
For like another example of like another case study?
Or if there's more on the same case study, yeah.
Yeah, I have another example too regarding the passing the PII. So I had a client that was B2B-ish business. So they do both B2C and B2B. It's like it was a subscription business that is used by students, but it's also used by the professionals. And we used to do a lot of meta campaigns, and we only had client sides without any PII being passed. And basically, we saw a very low number of meta conversions being reported, like very low, like something like we were spending 6 figures a month. And if we had 100 meta conversions, that was a good month. And alongside that, we do MMM, and MMM kept coming back with Meta is performing really well. Meta has, the highest ROI, and, data team, BI team is like, we built this beautiful Markov chain MTA model, and it doesn't have any meta conversions that are coming through. Like, what do we trust? Is it MMM or MTA? And then, And then we made the shift from client side to server side. And not just server side, but server side with passing emails, phone numbers, names, and all of that. And the conversions on Meta, I don't have the number here, but they went to the thousands. So you could really see that, what was happening there was an attribution problem. This was a product that 90% of the people used that on desktop. And on the other hand, you had 90% of the meta impressions being served on mobile. So for all of the cases that there was across device, Meta wasn't able to attribute, our MTA model wasn't able to attribute. And then only when we started passing these signals, we really saw being reflected on the ad platform to what we were seeing on MMM. And this came at such a good time, because it's, and we've talked about this, but it's difficult when the numbers that leadership is looking at is not matching what you believe is the reality, and then they're moving towards, let's cut this channel. So that's kind of like where we were moving towards, to the channel that MMM kept saying was the best performing channel. So it was great to have this set up, even though, like I'm saying, like ad platform reporting is not for you. But it was great to see, okay, like I can see that this is kind of reflecting what I see on MMM. And then I can also see that the MTA that we're using has this big gap that for this channel means that we're not able to see the impact on the reporting we use.
What a story, but I think you're calling out something here too, which is also just having that context about the channel. Knowing Meta, right, actually probably, well, half of the time over reports, half of the time under reports, and it gets overvalued, undervalued, whatever. But in this example, like in your gut, I'm sure there's a bit of like, this feels like Meta should be getting more credit. This is what the data science team feels as well. So there's something wrong with the tracking. Like, I think that's amazing because a lot of people don't realize, data science is really as much a data art, and there's a bit of intuition that goes into it. One thing I want to ask is on both of these clients, what were they feeling? Like, what was their problem that they were like, I need Barbara, right? Like,
Yeah.
like at what point did it get so bad for them?
Yeah. I think like for both of these clients in specific, they wanted to scale spend. They wanted to get paid media, as something that they were running, but they weren't paying that attention to really become, a lever on how the business grows. And when you're at that stage, it's very important that, you're building on top of the right foundation. And the right foundation can be, and I mean, it is like in the end, it's taxonomy and it's conversion tracking. And then alongside that, when you have those things set up, that's when you start to be able to do the real paid media work, which is creatives, landing pages, messaging, really starting to generate value.
And I totally agree, right? You need these foundations to be able to scale. You have to be able to move faster. It's usually with fewer resources that you're now tripling, quadrupling the budget. I totally agree, and I love to hear that. One question that I have that I'm still curious to hear your sense of is like,
Yeah, actually, let me
yeah,
just quickly add before this question. The paid search taxonomy example also has a nice point there, which is even though we increased budget by X, like I shared, we also moved to a much leaner structure. So I would say that the person that's responsible for paid search now probably has less work that needs to be done on the platform than they had it before.
yeah, and that again, when so many companies are thinking about revenue per employee and et cetera as a metric,
Yeah.
like that's a huge unlock. And that's really powerful. But I don't know how long you stay at these clients, but have you found like you've left and you come back and they've sort of gone back to bad habits, or are they able to stay consistent with this? Like, have you had any experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, I stay sometimes with clients for a long time. So both of these examples, I was there for the audit. It's also why I'm able to share, right? Because I was there for the audit, I was there for the move, I was there for the analysis. So they were both projects, one of them, the social one, I was there for like, yeah, over 2 years. And this one of the paid search, I've been there like since almost the beginning of the year. So it's already been, like 6 months or something. So I would say that, and then also it's rare that I go back. Sometimes I go back for like another project, so something else that's not related. But usually, these foundations are set and they're gonna build on top. So, what happens a lot is I come in as a fractional. Eventually, I help, the client hire their own team. That I'm there to do that bridge to help them, like, yeah, scale into this. And so I think the foundations stay. Maybe they change like channels, because obviously, channels are also not forever. Maybe something that works today does not work tomorrow. So maybe they change channels, they change messaging, they change product lines. But I think the understanding of the importance of the taxonomy that you have and how budget is distributed and the gaps of attribution and how to think about conversion tracking, I'd like to think that that stays.
I love it. So much to take away. I want to ask another question around Fix My Tracking, which is now the new offering you have. What did you feel like? Again, you've been doing this for 8, 9 years. Like, what pushed you to now do a productized service? Like, what are you seeing? Tell me a little bit more about how that's going.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've always loved building products. So that's the first one. So when I became like a freelancer like 9 years ago, my goal was, let me do freelancing so I have time to work on other things on the side too. Like building products or, in this case, a productized service is always like what I find the most fun, because I think it kind of, it matches the work that I do, which is something that I enjoy, but with a different set of problems on pricing, packaging, positioning that I really enjoy working on too. So that's kind of like, so I'd say my main motivation is personal, is what I like to do. But I think the question here is kind of like, why fix my tracking? I've been thinking a lot about like a productized service that I can do for a while, because I do fractional work and I'd say like that's a bug in a feature. It's very nice. I go very in depth. I learn a lot, but it's very difficult to package it. It's very difficult to build like something that is reproducible and I can sell at scale. And that's always something that, I've wanted to do. And I kind of had this insight where I realized that every project that I do, every client that I start with, I always begin with understanding if the tracking is working, if they're using the right type of event, if the event has a value, all of these things that we discussed. So I thought like, yeah, why don't I make this the deliverable, like the first step of the fractional work that I do. So it's nice because like, yeah, a lot of people have tracking problems. Like it's all very early stage. I'm now in the process of setting up my first paid search campaign for Fix My Tracking. So all very fun work. So it's all like very early stage, but yeah, every week I have, 2 to 3 leads that are coming to me, via like inbound. So it's definitely a problem that resonates, and it's something that can be very difficult to fix, because like we've talked about, it's a bit of data work, it's a bit of data science work, it's a bit of data engineering work, and it's also a bit of marketing work. So I think it does a nice job using like what I've really like grown myself into over the last few years. So I've been very excited about it, and we'll see how the year goes. As someone that's that's launched products before, things fail more often than they succeed. But I'm very confident this is a problem people are having. If I'm packaging it right, pricing it right, that's the part that I'm still figuring out.
Yes, I think everybody listening to this will 100% say, yep, that is a problem I've seen or know
Yeah.
somebody who is doing. So I think you've nailed the problem. And like you said, like every other startup, you just will have to go through that journey. Tell me what's top of mind for you for the rest of the year in terms of, here's what I think where the industry is going or what some of the challenges that are coming up, especially with maybe some more of these AI searches. Like, is there anything around that and how it impacts your work?
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of time before ChatGPT starts serving ads. They've announced yesterday. With the e-commerce of Shopify, Stripe. I saw in the LinkedIn they've started hiring people to work on an ads product already. So that will obviously be, yeah, very interesting. It's a whole new type of campaigns. It's very like bottom funnel, like search, but even more contextual and yeah, also like very high incrementality, right? You don't have the issue of like brands, so there'll be a lot that I think will still happen there. I think that not probably not this year, but God knows, they have deep pockets, so they're moving very fast. I think something that I see a lot of people, I had this client recently, that they're looking into, they do a lot of like paid search and Meta, something like 3-4 million budget a year. And now they're looking into launching, testing new channels. So then I had this, last couple weeks, I've been looking into tracking for all the channels like Reddit, X, TikTok, all of that. And I was surprised to find out every single one of them now supports enhanced conversions. So like, passing the email, passing PII and all of that. So I think we can definitely see this is a very clear move that it's happening. Also in terms of value too, I know Meta is testing some new bidding options based on LTV. When they're testing this they haven't announced it anywhere, so you haven't heard it from me. But they're testing this for, yeah, very big advertisers. So I think that also kind of, matches what we were saying about the importance of having value. So I think that we're all kind of like slowly moving towards investing on data signals and attribution. And I think that, that alongside creative diversity is going to be the two biggest levers for brands on pay media.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing. And I think you've really, again, well articulated that so many people are thinking about, oh man, there's this whole new search channel. How do we get on, AEO and all of this? But they're really also likely not thinking about the plumbing. So like, don't forget to think about the plumbing and making sure you're giving the credit where it's due. So thank you for your time. We're definitely going to have to do this in a few more months. But yeah, thanks again for being on Experimental.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for the great questions. It made it a lot easier to talk about it.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks for tuning into Experimental. If today's insights sparked new ideas or made you feel like a smarter marketer, consider leaving a review on your preferred podcast platform. It really helps support the show. For more in-depth discussions and resources, visit experimental.beehive.com. Until next time, be curious and stay experimental.